Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Messmer, and I am the Dungeon Master for the Rescued by Dragons podcast, an audiobook fantasy fiction podcast based on the D&D game that I obviously Dungeon Master for here in Portland, Maine. Today, I wanted to talk about the top 3 things I wish I knew before I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, just to kind of give new players an idea of what what to expect when they take the plunge and what would happen if they stuck with it and find out it's something they really like I did. So number 3 is I found when I first tried Dungeons and Dragons and I first played it with my cousins on a whim during a family gathering where the adults were all being, I say adults, I was still 19. Like my mother's family was being, sipping some wine on the back porch, being lame, going to bed at 8 p.m. So the cousins were like, hey, let's do something crazy and fun. Let's play Dungeons and Dragons, which my cousin's husband had been playing for a decade at that point. We started with a 3.5 game. I made my first character, which I'll get to in a second. And we played our first couple sessions, and it was fantastic. It was it wasn't really a serious game at that point, which is fine. Everyone has their own tastes. I have now learned that I prefer kind of a little more serious, but obviously not that sort of whimsical humor that comes in D&D is one of the things that makes it the best thing. But anyway, we were playing, and it was one of the best things I'd experienced, and there was a world created that I was in. I had so much agency over everything. I could do whatever I wanted. Obviously there were consequences, but I mean there wasn't a programmed, you have these options, you have to pick one of these things. Your character doesn't even have the ability to say, no, you, guard, because it's a teen rated game or something like that. That's what number 3 is that it ruined video games for me for a while, and I'm a huge nerd. I've been playing games since I could, some of my earliest memories are me playing an illegally burned copy of Warcraft 2 with the key code written on it one of my dad's friends gave us, or Age of Empires 2, or Medal of Honor, or Baldur's Gate, or, any of these games I've grown up playing. And suddenly, 19 years into my life, which was, I'm 24 now, so, it's been a bit of time. It took 19 years, and I finally found that those things that I used to hold on the highest pedestal, if these are the best, this is what I want to do with my free time all the time, suddenly those have been knocked off the pedestal, thrown on the ground, and stomped on because Dungeons and Dragons came along and was like, this is way better. There's no limit to what you can do. There's your imagination is everything. Your witty one-liners that you think of too late, you can still throw them in and get some laughs. You can be ridiculous. You can be serious. You can make characters that are total assholes and they can die. It's like every game is a hardcore game because if your character dies that you've sunk sometimes years into, it's gone. Just like that. But it makes the highs so much higher. And there's only one thing I found. There's only one thing I found that I've been like, you know what? Video games kind of did this a bit better, and that's just the speed. And that's fine. It's like the speed, Dungeons and Dragons taking a bit more time to get through things is great because it lets you go make some tea, go get a beverage, snack on some food, catch up with people, doodle, do some other things while the game's loading. And by that, I mean the dungeon master is looking through his notes or drawing a new map because, the team decided to go on the other side of the world than what he'd expected. So that leads us to part 2, which I'd mentioned a little bit of. No, I didn't. Anyway, part 2 is that I found that a lot of the times people's first character they make, which I see a lot of first characters because I'm the one in most of my friend circles. It's like, let's play D&D. Come on. And then I end up being the forever DM, but I like it. So a lot of the time, people's first characters I've seen end up having a lot more similarities with those players than they expected, than they realized, myself included. Example is my first character is a half orc wizard fist fighter guy who's pretty smart, but not really wise, and ends up flirting with any sort of hunky guy around. Go figure. There were so many things within that character that it started as a joke in that one night that I just talked about of my cousins and I dicking around playing D&D for the first time. Then that character turned into a serious campaign character, and it started as this whole orc who was kind of a dick to everyone, and which is not the part that overlaps with me, thank you. Ended up being this character with so much depth to it and so many just overlying things that I realized that the character ended up just kind of expressing me, but as like a caricature, and parts of me, like hating to lose, really being really loyal to friends, stuff like that. And these all sound like horoscopes, or it's like Taurus is really loyal and really hates to lose and has a bad day if they wake up on the wrong side of the bed. But I think you get what I mean, where these things, your first character, you never have any idea what you're doing. And then it ends up being something that really kind of connects with. I think it's just because it's easier to make something up with a structure, like based on something, even if you don't really know what it's based on. And it's easier to role play if you're role playing pieces of yourself formed into this new, more fun, cooler you. And it's easier to just kind of connect with that character. And when you connect with the character, then everything just kind of falls into place. Even if it's a character who maybe it accentuates your worst character flaws, and the point of the character is they're going to have a character arc getting over it, or maybe they're just going to end up arrested and in jail, like a lot of us might do if we just let our bad traits run wild. Number one, which I know is going to sound really cheesy, but I stand by it 100%, is that the number one thing I wish I knew before I started playing D&D was that it would change my life. And I don't mean that as like, I used to be a pauper living on the streets and suddenly I found Dungeons and Dragons and I'm a king living in a mansion. No, it changed who I'm friends with, how, like, my family dynamic, which I'll explain too, changed. My education changed. The media I consume changed because I found this thing and was so in love with it and crazy about it. And I still am, because, like I said, I think it's the best thing that you can do. I found it, and it just kind of set a bunch of things in motion. For example, my family, that cousin game that we started, then at one point my dad filled in because he used to play in college, high school, and he's like, oh yeah, I guess you guys are missing a person, I can fill in, you nerds playing D&D. Then it became a thing where my cousin, my dad, my sister, and I, and my cousin's husband was the dungeon master, would all play. And then we'd end up at my parents' house, and my mom would watch, and now my mom plays. So now I have a family game of Dungeons and Dragons that's been going on for 5 years with me, my sister, my mother, my father, my cousin, and her husband. And if I didn't start D&D, that like dynamic, I wouldn't see them as often for this sort of fun group activity. That wouldn't happen. My family is not the type of family that like gets together to hang out and catch up on a weekly basis, for better or for worse. That's just how it is. And this kind of threw a wrench into that and ended up making this game that we all see each other for. And we all have characters that are all connected. We're all, when there's nothing to talk about at a family gathering, we're the ones in the corner talking about our D&D games, and the rest of the family is all like, what? That my friends, obviously, my friend circle's changed. Some of my closest friends now I've really gotten to know because we started playing Dungeons and Dragons. My education, I took an acting class in college because I wanted to be better at Dungeons and Dragons and role playing. And I remember in that class, one of the like group activities when we first started the class was to say, why did you get into theater? And everyone was like, oh, I wanted to understand emotion better, and I wanted to connect with people, and I want to be an actor. And I was like, I want to play D&D better. And they're like, what is that? And so I ended up explaining what Dungeons and Dragons was to a group of acting kids. And I mean, that class was fantastic. But I wouldn't have taken it outside if I hadn't been into Dungeons and Dragons and improv and role playing and stuff like that. And I think my one regret with Dungeons and Dragons, which is a mouthful to say over and over and again, is that I didn't start it sooner, even though I've been playing for 5 years and I started at 19, which is pretty young. But I know JP Black from our Rescued by Dragons podcast, she didn't start playing until, we're going to go with well out of her 20s, because I am not allowed to mention her age or she gets very mad at me. We'll say well out of her 20s. And I think she'd agree with me that her regret is that she didn't start sooner. Like, people can play at all age groups, all walks of life, all of that. Obviously, if you're DMing a game for kids or you're running a game for kids, it's going to be a bit different than running it for teenagers or young adults or not young adults. I wish I had started sooner. I think everyone who really gets into it, their one regret is that they wish they had started playing sooner. So everyone who's thinking of playing D&D or any tabletop game, really, which is who this video is for, words of wisdom. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be a saying for investing in your 401k and stuff, but the best time to start was a week ago, and the second best time is now. Obviously, it's a little more difficult with D&D because the hardest part is getting a group together. But obviously the hardest part is that, and meeting with a group of strangers is terrifying. Like, I feel like D&D is one of the games that is flocked to by people with social anxiety because it's a game that can help work through that. In addition, like all this other stuff I said, it also helps with things like that, working through life experience and character flaws in yourself and social anxiety. But if you do take the plunge, one, I have immense respect for you if you decide to hook up with a group. That's not the right word. If you decide to meet up with a group of new people that you've never met, because they can become some of the best friends you'll have. And that's really what I have to say, is just be aware that it's going to change a lot of things for you, and it's going to be some of the best memories you'll make, some of the best friends you'll make, all of that. Not to get too cheesy, but, you know, sometimes sappy's good. Anyway, I hope you guys all enjoyed this little informative, hopefully, video. And if you're interested in listening to our podcast, link will be in the description. You can find our website, rescuedbydragons.com, Instagram at rescuedbydragons, Twitter at rescuedragons, because it was too long to have the by in there, so just to be confusing. And like, subscribe, all of that. And I will see you all next time. Bye.